I'm pleased to hand over to Gemma Godfrey, who's moderating this afternoon's panel. A financial wellbeing expert, Gemma is the founder of two businesses, most recently working with The Times, focusing on money matters, making money matters more engaging. She's also an advisor on the government's 10-year strategy to improve UK financial wellbeing. Over to you, Gemma.
Thank you very much. And thank you everybody for joining us today for REBA's Employee Wellbeing Congress session on practical and free ways that employers can help engage lower paid employees to improve their financial wellbeing. So I'm Gemma Godfrey, and I'm delighted to be joined by Tracey Newton, Director of Customer Experience for Yorkshire Building Society, Gary Dewin, People Director at the Co-op Group, Paul Williams, Head of Pension and Financial Wellbeing for Travis Perkins, and my colleague Jake Attfield, part of the Challenge Group Senior Lead for the UK Strategy for Financial Wellbeing for the Money and Pension Service, also known as MAPS. So why are we here? Well, as we've seen over the past few months, I was going to say weeks, but it's now rolled into months, money matters are more important than ever for our mental health, our ability to look after the ones we love, and critically to live the lives that we want to. So as employers, financial wellbeing is critical to your workforce. Now, too often we consider the financial wellbeing box ticked when we offer financial products as part of our benefits package, but many products aren't actually designed to meet the specific needs of lower paid employees. So this session brings together the Money and Pensions Advisory Service and progressive employers who stand out for financial wellbeing strategies that positively impact all of their employees. So how this is going to work, we're going to try and keep it quick moving. We've got less than 40 minutes now. What we're going to try and tackle are those four common questions of defining what we actually mean by financial wellbeing. We'll also give a sneak peek ahead of the launch of our country's strategy to improve the financial wellbeing of our population next month. What practical steps can you take to better support your staff? How can you build a community and a regional strategy? And how can you make people feel good about their money? We will also be taking questions from the audience, from you guys. So please do ask a question in the box below. But let's start off. So we'll start off with personal intros. In terms of financial wellbeing, I left a secure salary to set up my own business, which I sold while getting divorced and raising two kids. So personally, I've seen how vitally important financial security is for people to feel just that most basic form of agency over their own lives, to look after the people that you love. And on the other side, as an employer and advisor to other businesses and the government, I've seen the opportunity that we have to protect people from money worries. I'm going to hand over to Tracey, and then Gary, then Paul, then Jake. See if that works.
So in terms of why is financial wellbeing important to me, it's very similar to what you just described. For me, it's all about inclusion and the notion that actually when people have much more confidence and much more ability to face into and manage their finances more effectively, it provides them with a greater foundation for facing into any of life's challenges and provides a level of confidence and security. We know that the link between financial wellbeing and mental wellbeing is well proven. And when people are not feeling financially resilient and not feeling like they can have access to other elements of life's choices as a result of that, the impact on their mental health is detrimental. So that's one of the reasons why it's very important to me.
Fantastic. Gary?
Hi everybody. For me, it's a vital kind of everyday skill, but it's one that we don't teach in schools. Until very recently, employers never talked about it or didn't think it was their responsibility. People are generally quite reserved about the subject, so they think it's impolite or inappropriate to talk about it. And those that do know about it tend to struggle to articulate it or to be able to relate it to people. I'll never forget my eldest daughter, I think, is an intelligent woman, talking with her friends at the table about why an APR of 30% was better than an APR of 20%. And from that moment in, I thought we've got to get hold of this.
Absolutely. Okay, great. Well, there you go. At home and at work, it's important. Paul?
Hi. Well, for me, it's very simple. It's looking for a company like Travis Perkins. Employees are at the heart of everything we do, and employee well-being, which encompasses obviously financial well-being, is a cornerstone of the values and culture of the Travis Perkins Group. So I'm delighted to drive that within the Travis Perkins Group. I think one word that brings us all together, certainly a word I've seen a lot in the bios of people speaking at this conference, is passion. I have a tremendous passion for the subject and a passion to make a difference.
Fantastic. Jake?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I think for me, it's very similar to what Tracy said about that link between physical, mental, and financial health. And I think the COVID crisis has really highlighted this as an issue, and maybe proved the case for financial well-being that some of us have been trying to build for years. So there's we need to look for positives, but I think COVID had also really impacted those groups and those segments of society, certainly from a financial well-being point of view, who were struggling anyway. And that's why this conference is really timely, and hopefully this discussion too, that we can provide some practical steps to help all of the employers out there who are really interested in financial well-being.
Absolutely, exactly. That's why it's imperative that we get the right strategies in place and we can support people in the right way. So if we just launch into the first of the 4 topics we're going to speak about, which is defining what we mean by financial wellbeing. We've obviously already kind of touched on it and why it's important to us. But really, Jake, I'm going to start with you in terms of why it matters ahead of this launch of the UK strategy for financial wellbeing. So, just one of the things that I always fight against is jargon. And I think one of the risks that we have is that financial wellbeing becomes jargon and it becomes something that is a tick box with little impact. And I think we've all touched upon the fact that there really seem to be 3 pillars of of well-being: physical, mental, and financial. But if you get financial wrong, that could also have a detrimental impact on people's physical and mental well-being as well. So, we've seen all the stats. People are obviously looking to their employers to be able to provide some advice. And I think there's research it was 3 years ago that showed that 90% of you that are watching do agree that financial concerns do impact workplace performance as well. So, Jake, if I start with you about, just trying to bust some of these myths about what do we really mean, what do we need to kind of get started. So if I just ask you, why is financial wellbeing such an issue? What is MAPS and what are we doing to try and tackle the issue? That'd be fantastic. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Gemma. So pressure not to use any jargon to start with. I think just maybe start with the definition of financial well-being. I think it's about feeling secure. I think it's about feeling in control, knowing that you can pay your bills, and maybe also knowing that you can deal with the unexpected. And again, COVID has been an excellent example of where the unexpected has hit so many people. And then maybe finally having some confidence that you've got a healthy financial future as well. And I think if we can tick those boxes about feeling in control of the bills and being confident about the future, that to me is a healthy state for financial well-being. In terms of why does it matter? Why does it matter to employers? You've kind of touched on a bit. I think the latest survey I saw was that last year there was 4.2 million working days lost in the UK at a cost of over 600 million to businesses, to employers like ours, and that 7 out of 10 employees recognise this issue and recognise that it may have affected them at some point in the past. So, as I said before, I think it also has a hugely disproportionate effect on some of our most vulnerable groups. The evidence shows that women, certain BAME communities, and we've also talked about people already with mental health issues are most affected. So this is something that we can, if we all work together on, I think we can really make a difference. And I think that's where hopefully MAPS and the UK strategy come in too. So MAPS, Money and Pension Service, is an arm's length body of the Department of Work and Pensions. And we were conscious that thousands of organisations, the Co-op, Travis Perkins, YBS and others, and hopefully lots of you listening as well, are working on this topic already. But that coordination of efforts to improve the nation's financial well-being has been given to MAPS as a legal responsibility. So we've convened 11 challenge groups of experts from across the UK, from business, from government, from the third sector, to really focus on 5 national goals. And that is to improve some of the things that the other panelists have talked about. So to look into financial education, to look into savings, to look into good credit and better debt advice, and to come up with some recommendations for government, for business, for society in general, about how we can all improve the financial well-being of the nation over the next 10 years. So MAP's role is in convening that, but we'll also have an operational role in that as well, because we run free debt advice and kind of consumer services as well. So it's a really exciting programme. We were slightly derailed by COVID, in that we've had to split our focus into the short term and the mid to long term. I don't think us releasing a document about 10 years' time in the middle of a pandemic would have gone down very well. So the groups have been focusing on short-term recommendations, things that we can all do in 2021 to improve financial well-being. And that response to COVID, the specific focus on financial well-being, will be published in mid-October. And following that, we will be publishing 4 nation-specific delivery plans for England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland in March next year, which will hopefully lay out a coordinated and concerted action plan that we can all get behind to improve financial well-being of children, young people, vulnerable groups, and especially low-pay workers as well. I hope that answers the question, Gemma.
No, that was brilliant. And actually, just something to say as well is obviously in our discussions, because I'm on one of those groups, in our discussions, there has been a significant focus on practicality. So what practical steps can be taken to be able to support employers, to be able to support their employees? So what strategies, what support, what collateral, what tips that we can provide. So I think it's going to be a really, really exciting launch. And hopefully make a really big impact as well. Whether it's short term, building towards the long term, I think that's really important. So, I mean, Gary, you believe, and I found it really interesting that obviously, we're talking a lot about what happens in the workplace, but you believe that the problem starts far earlier. You mentioned, the fact that it's not taught in schools. So, can you just kind of run through that? Why do you think it is such a problem? What do you believe? Why do you believe financial well-being, is important? And why do you believe that we're kind of in this situation and things we can do about it?
Thanks, Gemma. Yeah, I mean, schools, certain experiences in schools might be different to mine, but I'm a governor at one of the co-op academies, actually, and so you sort of see it firsthand. And I mentioned the story about my daughter. So I think there is a sort of a lack of understanding and almost there's a belief that this is just really complicated. And it just isn't that complicated. As I said at the start, I think it's an everyday skill. We've just got to, sort of get to and help people get to. So I think for us, I mean, the co-op group, we employ a lot of people up and down the country, the breadth of the UK, and we've got lots of people in lots of different locations. So I think one of the most important things for me was to actually make sure, was probably the point I realised that if I thought something was a good idea, it invariably wasn't, because actually I didn't really understand what our colleagues needed. So the first point was actually accept, look at the data, look at the great data that's out there to make you realise just actually what the position for the UK in general is, but then start to think about your own colleagues and put yourself in their shoes and actually get a much better understanding of what they need, what they see, what they feel, what they hear. So probably one of the most valuable pieces of work we did after I'd spent a year thinking, putting products out there was a great idea, was actually asking and finding out. And again, not only finding out that I don't have very many good ideas, but actually just finding out just how our colleagues, our people, in our stores actually perceive, the benefits that we provide. And we ended up with this kind of real rich insight, which doesn't start with great products. It actually started with getting the absolute basics right. So, a colleague spending, half an hour trying to work out if their payslip's right, and invariably it is right, but actually spending that time having to work out if it's right, when that time could be spent doing something much more productive, or we could actually help him with the whole wellbeing piece, really struck a chord with me when that was sort of brought home. So, and the language we used was so central to that. We were making it a barrier in its own right. So whilst we haven't fully solved that problem, even just recognising this sort of, if you like, this wellbeing hierarchy of needs, start with understand your people, but then start with the basics and build from that foundation has been so critical. I think the one big surprise for me is actually you really do need to build that foundation, because I don't think it is there for the vast majority of people.
No, absolutely. And I love that point that you make, which is, we just can't assume that, any assumptions you make, probably are wrong. And the best thing you can do, and the simplest thing you can do, and the thing that everybody that's watching, so it is the most practical and free advice you can give, is just to ask, do the surveys, listen to your people and find out what their biggest problem is. I love that specific thing that, somebody's spending so much time actually just trying to work out what they're being paid, that that's a significant, loss of productivity. So no, I think that's a really valid point. If we actually just move on then in terms of what practical steps you can take, so we're touching on that point now. As we said, we've now identified hurdles around awareness, education, engagement, also the fact that people are overburdened internally, and also this fear of repercussions of anything that's deemed as financial advice. But at the same time, employers are a trusted source of information and key to financial security. So it does make sense that employers are looking, to you guys for help. So, Paul, you've spoken about this as well, and I think you were very kind enough to be open about the importance of learning from mistakes. The fact is there is no only right answer. So would you mind just sharing, what's worked well for you or not worked well for you, and kind of some tips for people that are watching to just take those first steps?
Yeah, sure, Gemma, happy to do so. As you say, I don't think it's not an exact science, and you won't get it right all the time. I think it's important to understand that. I think we've been doing this for quite a while now, and what we've been able to do is to build up quite a lot of good information about our colleagues. And I share Gary's view completely. Is I think one of the things we didn't have at the time was that level of information about feedback from our colleagues, and so there was a belief that we knew what they needed as opposed to actually asking them what they need, which I think is one of the common mistakes people can make. I think there was also perhaps there was an obvious focus on vulnerable colleagues, and I think that's absolutely right. But I think there was an assumption that the start point for colleagues was from a position of debt, which is not always the case. And this has been borne out from the surveys we've done. And also, I think it was perhaps a belief that if we introduced solutions into the benefits package, they would be the right solutions and they'd be the ones that people want. But again, it needs to be right for the company, it needs to be right for the colleagues. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a solutions-based solution approach to it, because you can do an awful lot of signposting and give information out to people without actually necessarily providing a solution alongside it. And I think the other point we may have lapsed into a little bit is I think you can almost over-engage, and by that I mean you can throw too much information and material at colleagues in the hope that some of it sticks. And the result for some could be the feeling that they know they're being asked to do something, but don't quite know what it is and where to start. So they can lose interest. So less can be more. And I think also the ability we have now at Travis Perkins to be able to target different cohorts means we can learn an awful lot more about people and the specific needs of the different cohorts. And I think something we may go on to a bit more as well is giving colleagues a voice. I think that and to be able to target different cohorts has been real game changers for us. So that we're putting in a lot of practical measures to enable people to have a voice. And I think having that voice as a platform. And by that I mean when we run webinars for people on financial wellbeing, we always ask people to submit questions in advance, and we dedicate an awful lot of the session over to a Q&A session so that people can ask questions about their specific situation, as opposed to having to wait for an awful lot of general information in the hope that what's specific to them is being answered. So, those are some of the practical steps that we're taking. And I would add to that we're looking as far as possible to make this a colleague-led initiative. So we're looking at a framework of having colleague champions to promote financial well-being, but also having colleague forums in which people can feed into, which will help us shape our future strategy and make sure that everyone's voices are heard so we can respond accordingly.
No, I mean that's fantastic. I like the idea that you said about actually splitting people up into cohorts, because there isn't a one size fits all. And as soon as you do that, you're trying to be inclusive, but you actually may end up excluding certain people that it just it doesn't really suit. So I think that's fantastic tips. I mean, Tracey, if I could come to you, could you could you share some of your experiences, what you've learned about your staff, what initiatives you've launched? And I know that you've got an amazing story about the impact that one employee can have on the rest of your workforce. And I think that was pretty inspiring. So if you can just share some of those stories about what you've been doing, it would be brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, YBS's journey is very similar to some of the other pieces that we've heard about today, which was all about not making assumptions and finding out and learning more about your colleague base. we started running surveys back in 2017 with our colleagues to understand how they felt about financial well-being and just about finances in general. And as you can imagine, in a financial services organisation, that's quite an ask to ask people to talk to you about. And what it brought home for us was a real sense of almost foreboding. People didn't really want to talk to what usually is the most trusted place, which is your employer, around some of these aspects because of the type of organisation we were. One of the standout stats was 98% of our colleagues said they wouldn't talk about their financial difficulties in work, but half of them, by comparison, would talk about mental health issues. So that just gave you a sense of how people thought about this stuff. So I think one of the biggest things we did was we just recognised it's taboo. It's a taboo. We recognised it's the last thing that people talk about is cash. And how did we start the conversation? So we went at it very much from a storytelling, colleague-led approach. We phased the work into 3 areas. We talked about taking control, we talked about creating a savings habit, and then we talked about coping unexpected and looking to the future. And we spattered all of those with different conversations as they went through. The starting point was a whole host of colleague conversations and stories where people at all different levels in the hierarchy, including chief officer level, talked about some of their financial mishaps in the past and some of the things that they'd learned, which enabled you to start a conversation. So if people at that level will talk about this stuff, then maybe I can too. And then we underpinned that with a whole host of education and data and support for line managers and toolkits around if you're having colleagues who are out of the work absence with mental health issues. Oftentimes, if you delve, it might be a financial issue. How do you support them with that? So we started a lot of pieces around creating a conversation, reflecting back to colleagues what they were telling us, and then providing tools for them to access in a way that worked for them as well. So some of that was about giving them tools that they could access from home, so they weren't having to access the money advice service through a work laptop, for example. How could we help them do that? The story that you alluded to, and somebody mentioned as well around the power of community, our colleagues have really embraced the whole wellbeing agenda massively, and they have really grabbed it and taken it forward. And that's meant that people have shared some really personal and really empowering stories. And one of them was an individual who shared her story of being in significant financial distress and really having to take that deep breath in moment, put your finances in front of you, get some structured help and support, and talked about the challenges around sharing that with your family, the sense of shame that came with that sense of opening up your kind of dirty laundry out and really facing into it and how difficult it was. It was a story that was very personally written. It was shared on our intranet, and the impact was really quite astounding in terms of people saying, you know, it can happen to you, it could happen to me. Let's start to have a conversation about how we move that forward. And that's really continued. We did, COVID's been an interesting one, right? You know, on some hands, that's made a lot of colleagues might feel quite, it's made them worry. We're really fortunate in YBS. We haven't had to furlough anybody. We haven't had to reduce anybody's salaries or hours. Equally, we know that people live with others that have. So we ran a Wellbeing Week a few weeks ago, and one of the first actions that we put in place was a colleague forum on our intranet about financial wellbeing, and the amount of data and stories and tips and shared learnings that people brought to that and really helped each other look at, you can use this benefit that might help you, there's this discount here, these are some choices that I've been making, here's the things I've learned. So I think what you've seen is over 3 years we've pushed out a lot of information and a lot of support for colleagues. But the biggest thing we've done is we've created a community and a conversation and a free dialogue around that. And we are seeing, you know, these numbers don't move quickly, but, you know, we've seen a shift in 2 years around the number of colleagues who had less than £500 in savings has shifted by 7% positively. That might not sound a lot, but if you're in the 7, that's really impactful. You know, the number of colleagues who are saying that they could cope with an emergency in terms of financially has moved up. The amount of colleagues who are saying they're regularly saving is shifting positively. And I'm convinced a big chunk about that is because we started a dialogue and a lot of the shared learnings in that space.
And that's fantastic. And I think that also answers, there was a question in from Louise Gavin who says, given that people are reluctant to talk about their finances, how do you effectively engage on this subject to understand their wants and needs? So I think you've kind of helped clarify how you're able to do it by, as you said, by making it actually relatable. You know, if your boss has got problems, that's not embarrassing anymore. You can kind of break the taboo. And as you said, people helping people, etc. So I think that is very, very helpful and actually really, really inspiring. So thank you. And also thanks, Louise, for sending through that question as well. Gary, I mean, in terms of, you've also spoken a little bit about, building, a financial wellbeing hierarchy of needs. And I think that's a really interesting term. Would you mind just expanding on that and what that means and how you're actually implementing that?
Yeah, sure, Gemma. Again, when I was talking before about how we went about this, you sort of product-led, you sort of go into deals and discounts. And what we found from the insight was actually that was at the very top of the pyramid. We had to get the base levels right first. So you earned that trust, you had the audience, you became that trusted source. And then you moved into wellbeing areas. And actually, whilst you're drawn to the discounts and the deals, that they weren't the things that mattered the most to colleagues. So actually doing that and being clear about, what our colleagues need most and what they tell us they need most really is what started to drive and inform all our decisions. And even just a basic thing in many ways. So when we were doing this discovery piece, somebody doing the discovery took a photograph for me of a typical, if you like, information board in a store, in a shop. So you go behind one of our shops, in the staff room, there's a notice board up there, and they took a photograph of it. And on that notice board, probably 60% of the things on there had come from the people function, from my area. So it was about pensions and benefits and well-being, but it was an absolute mass of information. It was just a wall of information. It was completely inaccessible, actually. Some of it was old, some of it was new, some of it was, bespoke in some way, some of it was relevant for some and not for others. And really that was a real eye-opener. This picture haunted me for quite some time because you probably could have gone into any one of our 2,500 stores and they would have had a similar notice board. So actually that evolving kind of, again, how the message gets out there. So you tailor it, you understand what matters most, and then you do get colleagues starting to talk to each other. As Tracey says, they start to tell their own stories. And that's way more powerful, and especially for a business like us, to get to our colleagues. The store manager, for example, for us is absolutely critical. And one of the things that we've learned is actually we need to build this into our leadership capability, if you like. So whilst it's everyone's responsibility, we recognise that not only do you need to have good products and relevant products, but you need your people to carry it. So they need to understand it and they need to be able to be comfortable to sort of share it and see actually wellbeing as part of their role as a leader. And that's been a real shift for us actually recently, because it was the kind of thing you'd say that's not really for us to do, that's not for me to do as a manager. But we're actually saying, no, it is. Start with yourself, but then actually share it with the team. And even if you just look at it from a pure productivity perspective, we know that financial well-being has a huge drain on people's mental health. So instantly you can actually help someone and help the business. So even if you're being purely financial about it yourself, there's still something in it, in that respect. So yeah, it's been a big learning curve, but back to basics, getting the leaders engaged in it, and the point that was made before, not just sending just information out there, en masse, because it just doesn't hit the mark.
And it's interesting, I'm just asking a question on that. Obviously, Tracey spoke a bit about, and I think that's fantastic, that she saw a shift. So there actually was a shift, and that can also play itself to as a positive motivation for people and for leadership. Do you do that? Is there any form of internal reporting or anything like that that's going on so that you can see the difference that's being made?
No, not yet. I mean, data's at the key actually of this. You've got good data, you can really get to the heart of these things. And I would say our data is getting better, but it's still not quite at the degree that we would want it to be. But I think the way we'll see things coming through, obviously we do a lot of surveys. We're regularly doing pulse surveys to see the sort of temperature is, and not just looking at it on a blanket basis, really drilling down and looking at how it is, in a food business versus a funeral business, to regions. So there's much more of an insight there. But again, in terms of how we judge, kind of how our leaders run our business, again, part of their makeup needs to be about how they actually are engaging colleagues, not just about the numbers, about their own KPIs, but actually about well-being. That actually being a very overt and specific part of it. So I think we will see, we're starting to see some some improving signs in terms of the data. You look at our engagement survey. Sometimes, if you're not explicit enough, though, you're not sure if the actions you're taking are the things which are actually driving that engagement up. You know, sometimes it can be difficult to. I'd like to take credit for it. I'm never shy of taking credit where it's available. But actually, you've got to be sure it is that's kind of generated that. So again, being more specific in the questions has been an important part in actually getting better data. So we're getting there, Gemma. We've got a long way to go, though, I think, to really get under that. I certainly wouldn't have Tracey's stats in terms of how we've managed to shift the dial on financial resilience.
And actually, there was a question that came in. I'm just trying to find it. Somebody asked a very good question, asking, they'd love to know, if I just find it 1 second. That's it. Okay, it's from Maggie. Thank you, Maggie Williams. Have any of the panel changed their financial wellbeing approach as a result of the pandemic? I mean, Paul, you talk a lot about, you know, as you said, like learning from mistakes, and you know, there is no tried or tested rule. Have you seen a significant shift in the way that you've been trying to implement a strategy? Because basically the world has fundamentally changed in a very big way in terms of how people are living and working. So did that change the strategy that you were implementing in any way?
Not specifically, but it's, as I think other people have said, we recognise it's the COVID-19 situation has almost been a perfect storm to put into focus the wellbeing pieces and the three pillars already mentioned in terms of physical, mental and financial. So coincidentally, we were looking at revisiting some aspects of our financial wellness strategy as a result of that. But I say that was a coincidence, but what it's done is allowed us to given us more drive, and we need more drive to know that how important this is for the group. I mean, during the whole COVID situation, at its peak, we had up to 14,000 people on furlough. So the company's response to that has been fabulous in terms of making sure that they kept in touch with those colleagues as best they could. And so, again, I think similar to what Gary mentioned, we've done a number of pulse surveys. We've done a number of initiatives which were already in train anyway, but it was almost a perfect opportunity for us to roll those out. And it's really something we want to build on in terms of getting that two-way channel with the workforce. So because we've had a lot of good data from the work we've done already leading up to prior to COVID, we really hope that the data we're going to start to accumulate as a result of COVID is really going to help us going forward in everything we do. And it's really great that even our chief executive, who's Nick Roberts, who's engaged with MAPS, it's a really positive message to give to the workforce. We've got that exec buy-in. So I know for some companies, getting that sort of buy-in of the leadership can be difficult. With us, that's not an issue at all. I think that's really going to stand us in good stead as we move forward with this.
Thank you. And exactly as you said, hopefully we'll gather more data, more insights, and that would be great. I mean, Tracey, actually, you've also mentioned that you've done a forum amongst your staff in coping with the impact of coronavirus, and you're launching different, obviously, benefits programs around this as well, including, I mean, traditionally you launched something that included retail discounts. I mean, how have you been managing things through the coronavirus? Has it affected your strategy at all? And I guess the other question I'd ask, because you've touched on so many points, including community, but we talk about regional rollout of a strategy, but also being specific to different cohorts. How have you managed that?
I think, to be honest, we haven't necessarily focused on specific cohorts of the organisation. What we have done is we've ensured that anything that we've rolled out, we've adapted it so it can be received within branches versus within head office sites. So we haven't necessarily sought to compartmentalise different groups if we started to look at what the financial wellness support could look like. In terms of COVID, for us, it's been around, I guess we're quite fortunate. We haven't had to furlough any colleagues. We're a key service, so we've maintained the operation flowing through. Where our support would probably come through would be around a number of things. One was around how we managed absence for individuals who were unwell as a result of COVID, which was, we said that we would start the clock again in terms of things like sick pay so that people were supported. We implemented open-ended dependence leave for colleagues, and we supported colleagues with emergency dependence leave in terms of how they managed the impact of various different aspects of COVID and their ability to be at work, and how we put more flexibility in that space. We also did elements around if we had people who we had moved to different sites because we needed to move them from a business continuity perspective. We made sure they weren't financially detrimented as a result of that. And that might be around paying for food. It might be around paying for travel. And then alongside that, we've really used our partnerships. So we've utilised Fidelity, who is our pensions provider, to put information out there to help colleagues understand what the pandemic might mean from a pensions perspective, to stop any knee-jerk panic and reactions, particularly around investments. And then we've utilised support through, we work with Salary Finance, and they work with us around straight from salary savings, and also debt consolidation. But what we've done with those guys is we've really pulled on their resources around documentation, seminars, just information pieces that we could put out to colleagues so they could access that too. So what we've tended to do is we've focused on the core in terms of that piece around what happens if you're unwell, what happens if you've got family challenges in terms of managing through the crisis. We've made sure that if we've asked people to operate differently, that's not been done at a detriment to them financially. And then we've provided additional support and education, which is very much focused on what does the pandemic mean around a number of different elements. There was a 10 tips from Salary Finance, for example, to work through a number of items to ensure that you were in the best position possible to weather anything that could come through the pandemic. And we did that really, really early on. So for us, it's been around just retaining the conversation and utilising our partnerships as effectively as we can.
God, I mean, you make it sound like it's simple, and that isn't. That's a lot of work, and I think that's as you said, it's clearly had a very key impact on the different business. I mean, if I just look at, I actually just want to give a moment to Jake because, as we said, we've got a really great opportunity here where we are ahead of the launch of the UK strategy to improve financial wellbeing, and I'm going to put you on the spot here and say, are there any sneak peeks that you can give us in terms of practical tools that employers should expect might help their staff?
Yes, I'm happy to be on the spot. I'd just build on something Tracey said as well, and about the information, the different cohorts as well. I think there's a lot to be said for kind of having information that employers both push out, but could also be pulled down by employees as well. I think that will go some way to address the trust issue. But also employers know a lot of information about their employees and what they're going through. And so there are those moments that matter where we can provide specific help to people. But there may be things that we don't know that are happening with their partner, with family and friends, where the employer has a role to provide information that they can use for their friends and family who may be going through furlough or a change of job and what have you. So I think employers having that kind of flexibility, not just bombarding everyone with everything, but giving that kind of difference, that push-pull approach, I think is really useful. In terms of sneak previews, I mean, the Money and Pension Service already has an employer portal, which has got lots of best practice and advice and tools that businesses can use. And that can be found at moneyandpensionservice.org.uk. And there's also links there where employers can contact our partnerships team as well for more support as well. And a lot of that is kind of free advice as well. So I think that's a good starting point. And I also anticipate that some of the things that come out that have got a specific ask or a specific drive or a specific campaign where we think workplaces can really help will find its way onto that portal or a development of that portal. So if you can make yourselves familiar with that and use the portal as it is, and then any feedback we get we'll incorporate into the strategy and what comes out as well.
Brilliant. Well, look, we've got like a minute left. So I'm going to kind of wrap up now. We had some brilliant questions that came through, so I'm glad we seem to have answered a few of them, but of course, if there are any others, obviously, I'm sure individuals will be maybe in one of the pubs or something to answer them. I don't know. So, but thank you everybody for your time. Just to summarise, in case this would be helpful to anybody, to summarise some of the key tips that we've heard. First of all, it was to ask people what they need, so asking your people, about what it is they need rather than assume, to do signposting towards the information because it may not be obvious. And obviously we heard there as well about the importance to prioritise and have a hierarchy of financial needs so you don't have notice boards where information's lost. Again, we had a balanced view between targeting cohorts or not targeting cohorts. Giving colleagues a voice is really important, and I love the whole using a storytelling approach as well as having stories right the way from the chief level down, just to inspire people and to show people that everybody makes mishaps with money, and it's, it shouldn't be a taboo. Having a toolkit as well is important, but also providing the toolkit from home is important so that people can actually access it in an environment where where they're a little bit more comfortable. Creating a community and a conversation so that actually people can then start helping each other is brilliant. And of course, I thought that was brilliant. Utilize your providers. They're there. You're giving them business. Use their resources, their collateral, their seminars. They're there to help. And as we say, getting the balance right between pushing information to people and having them pull it as well is important, and free support from the Money and Pension Service. So that's a bit of everything. Lastly, all I have left to say is, and it's 0 right now, so all I have left to say is thank you so much to everybody for joining us today. So firstly, to Gary from the Co-op, Tracy from Yorkshire Building Society, Paul from Travis Perkins, Jake from the Money and Pension Service, for sparing the time to come on here, answer as many of your questions as they could, and also for sharing their own personal experiences, which I just think is the most valuable part of this. And thanks to all of you for your time as well. We really appreciate that, as well as your questions, and hopefully this will help. So all that it leaves me to do now is to hand back over to Debbie.